In other words, the power of the purse. In part 2 of the book, which includes chapter 9, I explain what citizens can do, what the people can do to restore provisions of our Constitution that have been neglected, or demeaned, or diminished, or lost, as we put it. In chapter 9, we discuss the fact that one of the ways citizens can do this is by influencing Congress to exercise power that it already has, power that it has under its spending power, under the spending clause of the U.S. Constitution. This power gives Congress the ability to decide what in government gets funded and what doesn't. It's important to remember that as powerful as the President of the United States is, that power is shared, and the President doesn't have any power all by himself to keep his administration funded. The President of the United States has to rely on Congress passing laws that will keep the government funded, that will fund each and every aspect of the federal government, because the President of the United States can't do that alone. One of the most long-standing illustrations of this, that's been around for a long time, is that like so many other places in the Constitution, you have kind of a give and take between the President of the United States and the Congress. On the one hand, the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief, for example. On the other hand, Congress has the power to declare war. On the one hand, the President, as commander-in-chief, can make certain decisions with regard to how we're going to use our military, can order specific military strikes. On the other hand, Congress, because Congress has to not only declare war before it's declared, but also fund the entire federal government, including the military, Congress can put limitations on what the President can do in that capacity. All of this is meaningful, and all of this can do an enormous amount of good, precisely to the degree to which Congress decides to actually exercise that power. But it does have to exercise that power in order for it to do any good. James Madison, in the Federalist Papers, described the spending power for this reason as one of the great last protections against government overreach, because ultimately it is Congress which is the branch of the federal government most accountable to the people at most regular intervals. Congress is uniquely empowered to keep the federal government in check. And so that's why Madison explained in the Federalist Papers that through the spending power, Congress can turn the ship when it needs to. Congress can right the ship when it's headed in a dangerous direction. Congress has in fact done this on a number of occasions. It has done so under the leadership of both political parties, under presidents and Congresses of every conceivable partisan combination. This has happened a lot. A decade or so after it authorized the Vietnam War through the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, Congress ended the war in Vietnam by withdrawing funds. Similarly, in the 1980s, Congress cut off funding that had once been available for President Reagan's support of the anti-communist Contra rebels fighting the left-wing government in Nicaragua. And as recently as President Obama's first term, Congress reversed course on where to store the nation's nuclear waste. It had previously funded a project to build a spent nuclear fuel disposal facility, a repository in Yucca Mountain, Nevada. But after an onslaught of pressure spearheaded by Nevada's Senator Harry Reid, Democrats succeeded in defunding that program and saying, we don't want to do that anymore, let's not do that anymore, and so they didn't. In fact, 2 years before President Obama began rewriting Obamacare, his signature legislative accomplishment, one of Obamacare's many provisions, had itself been subject to defunding. As it was originally enacted in 2010, Obamacare created a program to encourage the formation of some nonprofit companies that would sell health insurance. The act appropriated some $6 billion, in fact, for loans and grants for those startups. But in 2011, Congress realized that a lot of this was going to waste, that it wasn't a good program, and Congress defunded the program by $2.2 billion. So this happens all the time. At least historically, it has happened all the time. And again, it's the best way to make sure the American people are still in charge of their government, to make sure that the American people don't become victims of a runaway federal government over which they can have no control. It's also one of the best protections against what some of the founding fathers worried about a lot, with the President of the United States becoming too much like a monarch. Because the president could never become too much of a monarch as long as the people's elected representatives, who would be subject to elections every 2 years in case of House members, every 6 years in the case of senators, although senators' terms are staggered so that roughly 1/3 of all senators are up for re-election every single year, that as long as this dynamic remained in force, that the people would remain in control of their government. And even if the president sort of started to skirt the limits of the Constitution or otherwise acted in a manner inconsistent with the wishes of the people, that the Congress could still turn things around and help to protect and restore the Constitution.